Getsu Fumaden is a bit of an overlooked game developed and released by Konami for the family computer back in 1987. It shares a few similarities with other titles developed by the company back in the day, but ultimately this thing has its own identity. There are some Simon's Quest vibes going on here with a protagonist that moves around like Leonardo from the first Ninja Turtles entry on the 8-bit Nintendo hardware. Aside from those related qualities, Getsu Fumaden does a lot to set itself apart. Last time on this channel we took a look at Genpei Tomaden and its PC Engine port. I hinted that this Konami title borrowed some elements from that game, which is true to a certain extent, and something these developers openly acknowledged when this thing dropped, but again, Getsu Fumaden is its own beast. Despite how good this game is, the IP has largely remained dormant, with only a few cameos in other titles over the years, including Castlevania Harmony of Despair and both of the Overworld titles, which are compilations of various Konami characters released only in Japan. A few spin-offs and fan games have popped up over the past few decades, but for the most part, Getsu Fumaden was a bit of a side note compared to the company's larger pantheon of popular properties. Another entry in the series is finally available after all of this time, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to revisit the one that started it all. This is Getsu Fumaden on the family computer. Getsu Fumaden is a non-linear action-adventure that kicks off with you exploring a maze-like overworld map. Straight out of the gate, you're going to want to have a pencil and a pad handy if you plan on experiencing this thing raw, without any guidance. Structurally, the entire framework of this game is designed similarly to those puzzle mazes found in newspapers and magazines back in the day. Only here, there aren't any clear entrances or exits, which results in a lot of trial and error through memorization. Some of the solutions might be hinted at while conversing with NPCs, but I wouldn't know, because I don't speak a lick of Japanese. Don't get discouraged though if you don't understand the language. All of the important items are displayed very clearly, so if you know the fundamental basics, you'll get by just fine. I first played this thing back in the late 80s and got through it without any guides or a translator, so you'll likely do okay. You'll just need a lot of paper or another comprehensive system of communicating to yourself where you've been and what you need to do. From this overhead perspective, you'll frequently encounter archways or tories that will take you to side-scrolling action platforming sequences. These stages will either have you moving left to right or right to left, depending on the direction you entered from, and are fairly short, though you will need to run through them each time you want to get around the map. There's a fair amount of backtracking necessary throughout the game, but personally, I never got tired of plowing through these areas. They're just the right length, and oftentimes there are a number of different ways to reach a map objective, so it keeps things interesting. The majority of these action scenes are quite diverse as well, with a large variety of enemies to work your way through. All of the controls are responsive, and the swordplay feels really good with a generous amount of reach both in front of your character as well as vertically. The developers simply nailed the combat in these sections, and the baddies have interesting patterns, so you'll likely remain engaged from start to finish. Item drops are plentiful, so if you're having a tough time trading blows with some of the more challenging foes, there are ways of replenishing your health, whether it be through natural level progression or grinding, which is quite easy and safe to do since enemies respawn frequently. Normally if I'm low on resources, I'll just hang out near a gate and kill the same baddie over and over until I'm in a better position to move forward. It takes no time, so it doesn't feel like a slog. At the start of the game, your character's attack is pretty weak, but it does level up with the more enemies you take down. There are two very clear meters at the top of the screen. One is your health bar, and the other indicates how strong your sword is. It isn't made entirely clear when your weapon gauge builds up, but it gradually increases throughout the journey, and these levels are permanent throughout the run. There's honestly nothing better than returning to an earlier area with a beefed up blade and skewering the droves of demons who gave you a hard time at the beginning. It's one of those RPG-like qualities that really works here, and the development of your protagonist can really be felt as you progress. Along with these battle arenas scattered throughout the land, you'll come across a variety of NPCs who seemingly dole out information, as well as shop goods. These are plentiful regardless of which land mass you're on, and help out quite a lot. Merchants sell a variety of single-use items including invincibility tools, screen wipe bombs, and health regenerating potions. The latter can also be found here and there tucked away in the side-scrolling action scenes. The same goes for extra lives, which are very handy because, like I mentioned, this game is pretty long. More importantly, the shop vendors sell quite a few reusable items, such as a very useful talisman that increases your defenses, a war drum that shoots a projectile from your sword, shurikens that fire a lot wider, and a top that enables you to spin around in the air. This thing is an absolute beast, as it allows you to simply decimate all living things in your path. You can bounce around like an absolute madman once you've mastered the technique. All of these permanent and limited perks are activated by pausing the game and cycling through the two item slots at the top with the A and B buttons. They reset after each side-scrolling sequence, so you'll have to activate them over and over again in each new section, but the menus are responsive, so choosing these buffs is quick. The two that you'll likely use the most are the Rock Crusher sword mechanic, which enables you to bust through specific walls, and the top jump. Thankfully, these two moves can be stacked, so you won't need to waste time messing around in the menus. Very long. There are a few different islands to explore. Your objective is to find the boss of a particular section, defeat it, claim a passport from who I can only assume is a monk, and move on to the next area. There are 3 bigger bads that contain fragments of the sword, and each of these are hidden behind large first-person dungeons, or rather, a hybrid of first-person and third-person, since the perspective is set behind your back. These areas are gigantic and extremely confusing, as all of the paths look the exact same. You're definitely going to want to map out where you are with the best of your ability, because it's quite easy to get confused in these mazes. They are extremely dense, with tons of branching paths, but there are a fair amount of goodies strewn throughout, and bonus rooms to break the tedium. These, as well as the enemy encounters, can act as landmarks to track progress in these confusing labyrinths, so be sure to make some clear notes for yourself. I know I keep saying that, but it's really important. There are a variety of well-detailed enemies that you'll encounter throughout, as well with crude animations, but I mean, this was 1987, and personally, I think this stuff is extremely impressive. Their attack patterns are pretty easy to strafe and dodge, but these rudimentary first-person sections are great just the same. More importantly, they don't feel like a gimmick to me, and really add to the overall experience in a meaningful way. Sure, navigating these dungeons can be a bit frustrating without any texture changes, and the depth perception can be a bit awkward when it comes to the combat, but I give it a pass. One of these 3 areas requires a candle as well, so the game really tries to keep you on your toes here and there. None of the bosses are fought from this perspective either. Instead, you'll get plopped out into a side-scrolling action scene for these battles. After collecting a sword piece, you'll never have to revisit these places again. It's good game design for the most part, as it respects your time by not forcing you to backtrack through these mazes once they've been completed. Another quality of life perk is that the game allows you to respawn exactly where you died in these first-person levels, which, again, is a testament to how thoughtful these developers were. In the 2D stages, you'll need to restart the level over. However, if you run out of lives, you'll be sent back with each continue, which can be a bit of a pain, as you'll need to essentially make your way through the entire game to get to where you were. A password feature is also available, but I've never really used it. This is a relatively long game, but I'm usually invested once I get started for the 3 to 5 hours it takes to see the end credits. Considering the size of the cart and the era in which this game dropped, it's kind of mind-blowing just how varied the level designs are. It's not the most colorful game out there, but there are significant amounts of background tiles used throughout. You'll journey through swamps, fire regions, and villages as you make your way through this thing, and while some backgrounds get reused frequently, there is always an interesting level on the horizon to break up the monotony. Getsu Fumaden is a good-looking game that is definitely among Konami's greatest classics. From Akira Komeda's beautiful lenticular box art painting to the simple yet effective cutscenes and NPC illustrations, this thing is visually stunning all around. Alright, so is there anything I don't like when it comes to it? Well, yeah, I don't know, not really. I mean, the visual presentation fits the tone of the story, the stages are varied, and the sound effects are pretty sharp. I guess if I had to pick at some nits, I wish the soundtrack was longer. Maizawa did a great job with the music here, but there's just not enough of it. After a while, I started getting bored of the same few themes that played over and over again, and while there are some great shorter stingers sprinkled throughout, the limited amount of tracks did start to get repetitive after a while. What's here is arranged and composed very well, and the audio fidelity is sound. Oh, clever me. But it's also quite sparse. I've gotta say though, this is a pretty small complaint overall. This is some of the best music you'll hear on the hardware, which isn't too surprising considering that this is a late 80s Konami game. Similarly to Genpei Tomaden, this game was available as a digital download on the Wii, but yeah, that's not a thing anymore. Good old digital purchases, am I right? Luckily, I found a copy a few years back and it wasn't a wallet buster, but who knows what the market looks like today. The good thing is that the original is available in at least some of the versions of the new release, so you really don't have an excuse to sleep on it. if you're interested and missed it before. If you haven't played it, I clearly can't recommend Getsu Fumaden enough. The difficulty ramps up nicely, and by the end you'll likely feel like a powered-up badass. I suggest sticking with it and not using a guide to make your way through the maze-like world. It's an extremely forgiving game with tons of spots to grind health and cash. Just make sure you invest in that spin attack. You can thank me later. Next time on this channel, we'll be looking at another similar game to Genpai Tomaden and Getsu Fumaden for the Sega Master System. So stay tuned.